I was really drawn to a smaller church context, recognizing that bigger isn't better.
I truly believe that the American church is moving smaller.
It requires more sacrifice and commitment, surrender, right? That's where a small church really serves, at least the Asian community. It can serve the Asian community really well.
Welcome to Parish, a video podcast that celebrates, equips, and focuses on small churches and why they matter so much. We believe small churches are uniquely positioned to integrate in their communities and engage issues in ways only small churches can. I'm your host, Canaan Hurst, and this is episode 13, Diversity and Cultural Identity, Part 2. In this episode, we continue our conversation with Josh Lin and explore how to navigate these issues in a small church.
I want to start transitioning to kind of small churches specifically because that's what this is for. And this is all very relevant. I think as a transition into that space, like when we're talking about diversity in the church, I think, and I say I mean, majority culture, white churches, evangelical churches think in my church building is the place for diversity.
Right.
And so if we don't look like it, then, well, we're just not diverse.
Yeah.
And, we totally underestimate your greatest job is to leave this place to be Jesus's hands and feet in the community, to love, to advocate for the marginalized, listening to marginalized communities. Your story of I was, laughed at for the food that I ate in school, these things that seem simple, but that affect you to this day, all of these kind of traumas and things. That diversity actually, and I'm curious what you think about this, diversity actually can play itself out outside the walls of the church.
Yeah.
To connect with other communities, to love them, to ask, what do you need? Like, can we help you in any way?
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that leads into that posture that I had just mentioned, like, rather than, hey, come join us, it's this posture of, hey, I'm gonna lay aside myself and come join you.
Yeah.
Where you're at, right? And so and that kind of posture, I think, is neighborhood ministry. It's necessary for a smaller context ministry where you're coming alongside of other people, no matter what their background, no matter what their ethnicity or race, if you want to use that word, no matter what makeup they have, that as a follower of Jesus, you come alongside of them and pace with them where they're at and walk with them. And it means laying aside of, well, what about me? What do I need? What do I get out of it?
Right.
And I think that becomes the heart of, especially like whether we're talking about parish or neighborhood or just this is where I live, and I'm going to come alongside of these people, and they might be different. They might be the same. We might have a lot of similarities, but I'm laying myself aside so that I can walk alongside of them, and along the way point, hey, Jesus is over here, right?
Right. And if your goal as a person who's trying to diversify your church, I think you need to ask yourself the deep question of, am I wanting to boast to other people that we have a diverse church?
Yeah.
Ask yourself that.
Yeah.
Because if the answer is yes, reevaluate success in diversity or advocacy.
I will confess that I have friends who are white friends who are wanting to do diverse ministries, but how they go about it is a come join us kind of mentality, right? This is what we're doing. Why don't you come join us? And hoping for diversity to happen that way, and it never does. Instead, and so then they walk away thinking, oh, a white guy can't do it, and I don't believe that, because I have friends who, a lot of it is just that posture difference, a lifestyle posture difference, where they say, I want to come join you, in humility, in earnest desire to want to grow, like, because they know that, hey, with me rubbing shoulders with you who is different than me, I get a bigger view of God. Like, I learn so much, and I want to learn so much, and I have so much to learn from you, and so I want to come alongside of you. But along with that, I have something to contribute as well, and I have some gifts that are uniquely mine. And hey, God's this way, and with that posture as a white male, like, they're able to create diverse spaces because of that approach. I think oftentimes we think of that as missions, and I have to say, like, a lot of my thinking has been shaped by missions theology, more so than by systematic, reformed, or otherwise kind of theology. Right. That it's theology that's been formed by on the ground, experiences in crossing boundaries and crossing cultures, knowing that it can happen, because it happens overseas when a white guy will go into a tribe or into a place and they bring grace, they breathe life. God, the gospel takes root there. They become rooted in that community. That's the same posture that we have to have here. And that's how diversity can happen, because then all of a sudden you become a safe person. And so where you are is a safe place. And these safe places, like, everyone hungers for those kind of places where you can kind of and be a mess, or be fully Chinese or otherwise. And it's appreciated, and it's valued and treasured. And it's said, pointed out and said, hey, this is good. We need those kind of places, and who doesn't want to be in a place like that? And I guarantee you that those places are gonna become diverse because of that. Yeah.
Yeah. When people approach diversity or friendships or relationships, but cross-culturally with humility,
Mm-hmm.
you had just mentioned, like, if I'm doing that, I can learn so much from your community.
Oh yeah.
What specifically is the Chinese church doing really well that
Oh man.
that
Wow.
other folks can learn, from your example? I mean, I know you're not a part of one right now,
Yeah.
but
Canaan, thanks for that question. Like, that's and I will say I'm gonna stumble over the answer, because I'm not asked that often, but it is an important question. So I've been doing a lot of processing and thinking over the years, and so this has been a process of years, and people might contradict me, but I'll just, in the case of, like, musical worship, for example, it's very clear, like, African Americans have their style of musical worship. Even Latinos in different, like, Colombian or Mexican or they have their style, and there are some similarities and qualities and characteristics of them. And so I've been asking the question, well, what is it about Asians, whether it's Korean, Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, like, even Burmese. Like what would be the things that I would say are qualities of Asian American worship that could be a gift that we bring. And having had the privilege of being in a lot of different spaces across the country, being able to worship, it's wildly interesting. There's some characteristics that kind of emerge across the board that resonate. And I think the more that thought that I've put into it, the more I realize it's because it's a reflection of it's part of the reflection of the culture. Because that's what the best worship is, right? It's a reflection of your identity, and you're reflecting that identity back to God. That's what worship is, and that quality reflects the image of God, and that's why it's so beautiful and so diverse. Because God is a big God, and he's got a big reflection, and so as a culture, we get to reflect this small little slice. But it's a beautiful slice. And so I've come up with a few words, realizing so if I were to describe Asian American worship, and this is Asian American worship, so this is a really unique space. It's a really sliver. It doesn't describe, Australian, Chinese Australian, or Asians, or Malaysians, and Singaporeans, or this is just what I've observed anecdotally here in the States. I would say that Asian American worship here in the States, two qualities that I think are essential is that it has to be invitational and intimate. Those would be the two key words that I would use. Invitational because we, as a people group, we're pretty compliant, meaning we need permission. We wait for permission. Part of that comes from that Asian culture of assimilation or compliance. There's a Japanese proverb that says that the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. Like that. You shouldn't stick out. There's a group identity and a high value of group identity, and that's pretty common amongst Asian cultures. Your family identity is higher than your individual identity, and so it builds in us kind of a compliance. And so in order to engage in something, you need that invitation, that permission to engage. That's a quality that I've seen all around the country, and it needs to be intimate. So it can be celebratory, it can be reflective, but it needs to be intimate. And being intimate is all about knowing, familiarity, family, if you will, and that is a core value of Asian cultures, where you share at the dinner table. Even how we eat is very intimate because, in the West, when you put in an order at a restaurant, you get the order. You have your dish with your side dish. You have your main entree, your side dishes, and everything, and you have your utensils, fork and knife, and everything. But at an Asian restaurant, especially Chinese restaurant, everything comes out in the middle, and you share it. And if you're really family, you don't even use the serving spoons or things utensils that are in the middle. You take your own utensil, you stab it, and you bring it maybe to your bowl, but straight into your mouth oftentimes, and that requires intimacy, right? That requires that familiarity, and I feel like that is reflected in Asian American worship, invitational and intimate, no matter how loud or raucous or it is, and it can be, because that's some of the best celebratory expressions is when it's intimate, right?
Yeah.
So, so yeah, I like that. I feel like is a gift, and the gifted Asian American worship leaders that I have encountered and who lead, like it resonates amongst the Asian community, but it resonates with other people too. Like when they come in, they're like, I don't know what it is about it, but even in my preaching, in my preaching style, I've been trying to keep those qualities in mind. That when I get to bring God's word to a community, I'm going to bring it Asian style. What is Asian style? Well, I don't know everything, but I know like these are some of the characteristics that I would use to describe it: invitational and intimate. And I want to create that wherever I go. So I'm sure there's more. That's my very, very amateur effort towards answering that question. But that I feel like that's one of the gifts that
Yeah.
that we bring.
I mean, that's beautiful. Invitation and intimacy are key to living in a godly biblical community.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that should translate,
Right.
in all of our churches as something that a lot of churches that don't have those aspects, I think, need to pursue or can pursue. And that's really beautiful. Thank you for that. A lot of like this is about small churches,
Right.
and we've talked plenty about how at big churches, there's not much relational equity or cost required of someone going. So there are lots of folks
Yes.
who can go and slip in and slip out, and
Yeah.
it's and for a lot of people that's comfortable. But you don't really have to. It doesn't really cost you much,
Right.
relationally. And if the God we follow cost him everything to sacrifice for us, then invitation and intimacy go hand in hand with community.
Definitely. And I think that's why, like, I would say that I have a lot of friends who they will attend large churches, and I've attended large churches, but where they become integrated to be a part of that church is when there is invitation and intimacy that's experienced, and particularly for Asians. So I think that there are a lot of Asians that tend to stand in the periphery of churches because they haven't received an invitation, and they haven't rubbed shoulders with people enough to find intimacy. And that's where a small church really serves, at least the Asian community. It can serve the Asian community really well.
Right.
Even in the large ministries that I've done with in the ethnic community, it's always broken down into smaller segments so that invitation and intimacy can really take on life and expression. So I would butt heads with people about this sometimes. Different ministry philosophies, I guess. But I remember a discussion about how I was conducting our Asian American ministry, how our small groups were set up and everything. And I remember the surprise that everyone had that we were always desperate for more small group leaders and needing small group leader training and everything. And they were like, why do you need so many small group leaders? And I said, well, because we have so many people, we need more leaders. And so we're constantly trying to raise up more leaders. Well, how big are your small groups? They're about maybe 3 to 5. Anything bigger than 5, it's just too big. And the room, it was a room of white people that I was partners with on staff doing campus ministry, but they were shocked. Like, how that's so inefficient, right? That was the voice. This is small groups need to be 13, 14 people. You need to build in the fact that, a quarter of the people aren't even going to show up. I'm like, what? Everyone shows up.
Wow. Yeah.
Everyone shows up to our small groups. No one ditches. No one skips out,
Right.
And if they skip out, like the small group goes and hunts them down. Like that's what we do, because we're essentially creating family units. We're creating these intimate spaces where you're known and you know people and you're missed. And so we had a ministry. It was large. It was at its height, it was like 400 students.
Wow.
But people were known.
Yeah.
Like and we had to create it. We had to organize it that way because that resonates in our cultural expression. If we did it any other way, they wouldn't join us. And so it was mind-boggling to my fellow white staff, but I knew that and so I even had supervisors who were saying, you need to change the way you do things. And I didn't, because instinctually I just knew this meets the Asian heart and allows the gospel to take life. And I hadn't landed on these words, invitational and intimate, yet, but intuitively I knew we need to do it this way because it allows. And so, yes, it's more complicated. It's harder. It requires raising a lot more leaders and keep holding the leaders to a high standard. There's all kinds of mess that comes with it, but it's worth it because that's who we are. For us to think about having an 18-person small group, that's not a small group. That's a lot of churches are
not even that big.
Yeah. And then to assume that a quarter to a third of people just aren't going to show up from week to week. I'm like, well, that's not invitational, and it's definitely not intimate. It doesn't. And so it's not our expression of faith and worship. And so we set things up to be small groups. Yeah. And if someone's missing, they miss out. Oh, I had a test. Oh, I had, or even now, I still feel that. That is my default mode. Because if someone's missing, then it's not because of a checklist. It's not because I have to. It's because of the intimacy. We say, hey, where were you this week? Missed you. Is everything okay? Everything all right? And so I think I've been to different trainings for churches, small groups, ministry, discipleship, and they'll make that as a part of the training. But that's just inherently a part of our culture and our heritage.
We weren't made to be able to have that many close relationships.
Right.
It's just impossible for humans of any ethnicity, race, culture, whatever. So that makes a ton of sense. And that leads perfectly into something I really want to talk about, which is the values and actually the opportunities small churches have because they're small. Me and Nathan started a church that at times were just us and our significant others and another family, maybe.
So many of those. Yeah, absolutely.
But if that family was missing, it was oh my gosh, we want them back really badly.
Yeah.
But if our churches are set up or the expectation is, we need a bunch of small groups and we're not satisfied if they're not all 15 people.
Right.
This kind of idea that our churches need to grow so that we can get there.
Yeah.
When actually this podcast is centered around, let's celebrate the fact that we're small.
Yeah.
And how we're positioned to be able to hold these tight relationships that are devastated when people aren't there.
And it is devastating, and grace needs to be held, right? Knowing that some of that is going to happen, but I think that people intuitively know when you really genuinely care for them.
Right.
And you want to be in those places where people genuinely care for you.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the beauty of small church, small spaces.
Yeah. So why did you choose a small church? You've then been in and out of larger and
I
middle
have,
sized
yeah.
and small. Most recently,
Yeah.
I know that you've been a part of a church in our network of churches.
Yeah.
Talk about that. Why small church, and kind of how did you get there?
I will say, like, it's been a very intentional faith journey on my part. So when I was working in campus college ministry, it was a large ministry. And then I worked at a medium to large church out in the Chicagoland area, working with teens and youth group, but it was still a large ministry. Actually, I think that one of the reasons why they hired me was because I knew large ministries. I think at our height, we had over 200 teens in our youth group, and
Okay.
and that's not including college students and adults, and that I also got a chance to work with, and but looking for the next ministry context, I recognize that my heart really wanted these intimate spaces, to be in a community, to be fully known, and to know others. And so, as I was looking for church opportunities, there were like medium to large churches that were interested in wanting me to interview me and everything, but I was really drawn to a smaller church context, and that's actually how I landed in Denver. We served, my wife and I, we served at this church for 9 years, building deep, intimate spaces that with relationships that we still hold on to now, but also recognizing that our ministry was shifting outside of the Asian enclave, to be bridges, to be intentional bridges in our neighborhood. We realized we wanted to be rooted. I was developing more and more theology of place in my life, and the more I did, the more I recognized that that I was spending less and less time and focus on the ethnic specific part of the ministry, and more in the location of the ministry, but which required a different skill set, a different mindset. It required me to be that bridge rather than that familiar thing of, oh, well, I'm Chinese, I'm ministering to Chinese Americans, and that's really comfortable.
Yeah.
And wanting to be in a smaller space like that. So that's what led us to first exit our Chinese church. It's funny, my wife Tina, she like said high five when we were exiting the church. It's like, way to go, not exiting with some controversy or problem or anything. Like we were feeling like, hey, this is where God is leading us. I had a chance while I was at the Chinese church to become more involved with some local schools, serving in different capacities on a school board and for a charter school, and then we were attending mayor's meetings and neighborhood meetings, and just getting more involved. We have a neighborhood association that we would go to meetings to, and just becoming more and more known in the neighborhood. And as we did, trying to be fully Asian. And so we would invite our neighbors into our home and try to create intimate spaces, introduce them to our food, and which was a little hit and miss for some of our neighbors.
Yeah.
We had invited our neighbors to come celebrate Chinese New Year one time, and had cooked up dumplings, and there are Chinese medallion meatballs is the best way I could that's the translation I would put it. Noodles and everything, and we saw one of our neighbors, like, she would take a dumpling, and these were fried pan fried dumplings with a crispy skin intentionally on the bottom,
Yeah.
and she was cutting off the crispy
Oh, no.
at the bottom to like just and ate one, and I don't think she touched anything else. We had tons of leftovers because this is food that people aren't familiar with at all,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
but we did it anyway.
Right, of course.
And I think it's just been a part of our own faith journey, recognizing that bigger isn't better. And yes, you can create those smaller intimate spaces. You have to as larger churches, but really wanting our lives to be integrated with our ministry. And part of that was that the neighborhood that we lived in isn't predominantly Asian. In fact, it's predominantly white. But that there's a deep diversity to our neighborhood in the East Colfax corridor. There's a large refugee community that lives there. There's relatively large. There's a large Latino population, Spanish-speaking population that lives there. There are African Americans, and there are even Africans that live there. And just over time, leaning more and more into that community, intentionally crossing boundaries and crossing barriers, and hopefully carrying grace into those spaces. And so the more that we did, the smaller our world started to be, and realizing that, we're going to create, we want to create church moments here. So yeah, that's how we landed in knowing that at Sacred Grace, as a small church, had the similar value, and like-minded people. And those are some of the people that we're still walking with right now.
And with that, has produced different and unique challenges, right? Too.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about that, that I'm sure a ton of people listening can resonate with.
Yeah.
From budget to,
yeah. Because when you don't have a critical mass, doing things as a church is a lot harder. But I like the way that you describe it. Like, it requires more sacrifice and commitment, surrender, right? It's a lot less convenient. It's not simple and easy. You have people who have to sacrifice and surrender in order for things to happen, in order for a meal to happen, in order for a worship service to happen, in order for childcare to happen. What do you do with all these kids? And it requires a whole lot more sacrifice and surrender. I think that's deeper discipleship, at least for me. It shows me how self-centered I am, like how much, I just want my weekend, and I want my free time, and I want someone else should figure this out. That's too often, I think that's how our Western minds think of service and ministry, is we outsource it, right? Well, here, let me give you money, which is a lot more convenient, and we'll hire somebody to take care of it.
Yeah, if you've got it.
Right, if you've got it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so this small church really, it in a lot of ways, it takes me back to my immigrant families' roots where you don't have those resources, and so everyone just chipped in. Growing up, there wasn't enough money for childcare. So what do you do with kids in the summer? So the families would all the immigrant families got together, and the kids spent a day at each family's house. And that family sacrificed that day, so they didn't work, or they took the time off, and didn't, and they had an adult there, and they would engage in us like, it's not just daycare, it's how do we engage our kids in something that would be productive for them as well, that would be formative for them, and so and that's what we did. A bunch of these ethnic families, and everyone just pitched in, threw in. That is required for small church, and that's not the norm for churches anymore. I think churches really struggle with that. But I appreciate so my dad still serves in our Chinese church. It's a large church now, 800 adults, so including kids and teens and everyone. It's probably 1,200.
Wow,
it's a large church.
yeah,
But he talks about and I like it because I hear what he has to say, and in my mind I'm like, invitation and intimacy. So as an ethnic church, we feed the church every weekend because food is deeply woven into our identity and our expression. And so we share a meal every week. The whole church, all 1,200 people, which is ridiculously complicated to do, right?
yeah,
But he said, but we have to create these spaces. So he would describe how, as a church, they could outsource it. They could hire somebody. They could cater it in, but no, so we have a bunch of these elderly groups of people in the church, and he says they are charged. These elderly folks, they are charged that every Thursday, Friday, and even Saturday mornings, they'll come in and start chopping vegetables, right? And it's a pain in the butt because they have to get bussed in from their retirement communities and everything.
Wow.
And they come into the church, and someone has to set it up. They order all the vegetables and everything, and they just chop. And year after year, someone, especially younger in the church, says, let's get rid of this. Let's just hire it out, get it catered in. They can chop, and they can be so much more efficient at it. And my dad is really insistent. No. We have to have this because it creates a space, because it invites these elderly who otherwise they get left. We're inviting them to be helpful, useful, contributive to our community. But while they chop vegetables, it's intimate. It creates this space every Thursday, Friday, Saturday morning where they're chopping, cabbage, they're chopping tomatoes, they're chopping all kinds of vegetables for our church lunch on Sunday, Sunday after service. And while they're doing it, they're gabbing, they're interacting, they're connecting with each other. And it's an organic space, but so for decades, and I say decades very intentionally, there are always voices. Let's get rid of this. Let's just hire it out. But my dad was adamant. No, we have to create an invitational, intimate space. Yeah. Well, those are my words. He wouldn't use those labels, but that's so needed and necessary. And I think in a small church context, that is the mode of a small church, right? Yeah. Everyone chips in. Everyone, if it's going to happen, it's got to be everyone's on board. Right. You can't just attend or spectate in a small church.
Yeah, so true.
Because it falls apart. And I think that that's really healthy. That's really good. It's hard much harder. So much easier. Oh, let's collect more people so that they can give, so we can hire and professionalize it. We can hire someone to take care of it.
Right.
But I think then we lose out on a part of discipleship that is natural, is supposed to be a part. When they're chopping vegetables, the kids come along as well with the elderly because their grandparents are there and everything. And they're chopping alongside. They're watching, like somewhere faith gets all of those intangibles like happen in those spaces.
Yeah. That's something I love. Like I truly believe that the American church is moving smaller and not necessarily, I mean, I know numbers of Christians are dropping, but the truth is we're trending towards more smaller churches, than we've had in the past.
Yeah.
But still our resources, the people who speak and give advice are usually have so many resources at their disposal.
Right.
So if the people that we're looking to learn from are the ones who are hiring out this work,
absolutely,
then we're going to be super dissatisfied, angry, and definitely like see the forced volunteerism as a negative instead of as an opportunity.
Yeah, there's can open worms.
Yeah.
Like you touch on a such a rich point, because you think about conferences and who we think of as well-respected voices for how ministry should happen. They're coming from large, organized, professionalized spaces.
Corporations.
Corporate kind of models for doing ministry.
Yeah.
But I think that the most significant ones are that we need to start paying attention to are these smaller places where things are much more raw, less refined. There are no easy answers. And there's something to be said of that process of learning that doesn't happen in 3 bullet points that is presentable in a PowerPoint presentation or something that you're just rubbing shoulders against somebody who has been significant in other people's lives and to learn from them. That would be small church experts. But they're not seen as experts, right? Because they don't have the pedigree. They don't have the 2,000 church, 14 location, context.
Maybe they're bivocational. Maybe they're not even paid at all.
But those are the places that are I really have grown to know are making the most significant impacts on individual lives. And they're the heroes. I know of pastors who have turned down roles at larger churches and congregations and ministry contexts because they want to stay small and close. That they're pastors at heart. They know that these are the people that I'm supposed to shepherd, and I'm going to stay in that place, and that's really compelling to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You get to actually know what people are.
To know them by name, right?
That
that's one of the qualities of a good shepherd, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of my own journey and how I've stepped into smaller and smaller places, the older I've gotten, the more experience I've had in ministry.
Yeah.
I've actually found myself going to smaller and smaller contexts because that's been my journey in studying Scripture and walking with Jesus and realizing my own wiring and what giftings I get to bring, and knowing that it's in these smaller places that I need to be. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So amazing. I could keep talking with you forever. Yeah. So what I'm hearing through this conversation is, if you are small and rely on volunteers or have 2 or 3 people in your church, so meals are, you need other people to come alongside you to chop vegetables.
Right.
If you're forced, and you don't have budget to do programs,
Right.
That's one thing Nathan always talks about is, I don't have the resources, people, money to start a school, to start some kind of big program.
Right.
And so I have to use the systems and the kind of institutions around me in order to connect with community.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing, because then you're actually closer to people who might not know Jesus.
And you're calling them, quite frankly, to deeper discipleship, right? To live out faith in real ways, in tangible ways. And it's so messy because people fail and it's broken and it doesn't work, and there are conflicts along the way in these smaller contexts. Like, I think in larger contexts, you can kind of like polish away some of those rough edges, but in a small context, they're blaringly obvious.
Yeah.
And I think that again, I think that's discipleship. That's what I've come to learn, like thinking about all the train wreck moments of being in these small contexts and realizing, like, this is really good for me, and it's good for the community, and we need to continue to figure this out together, without simple answers, without the 3-point PowerPoint kind of like pat answer, work it out. Like, this is really, really messy. And it's people's lives. And it's interesting how many people flee from those spaces, because it's so much easier to be anonymous in the back of a room and sing and hear a really great, compelling message and call that church. And I don't think that is the church at all.
Right. You're left with a relational hole a lot of people don't even know how to recognize, because nothing's required of you.
Absolutely. And so if there's no mess, I think that there's very little discipleship, maybe.
Yeah.
If there's a lot of mess in a small community, and there is, it requires a greater capacity for grace and forgiveness. It requires a greater capacity of patience, and like, there's going to be you're a small church. You're always going to run into that. I'm doing everything. People aren't doing anything, and working through that, and it's true, but I think that is deeply forming.
Yeah. To kind of wrap up also with the diversity piece.
Yeah.
I think that's like your wisdom on that is so good, because it's seeming to me now more like diversity in the church probably looks a lot more like partnership than and in some cases churches have a lot of generational diversity and ethnic diversity and racial diversity, which is beautiful. But in places that are trying to do that or can't seem to do that, or exist in super homogenous neighborhoods, that diversity in the church can happen outside the walls of your building.
Oh yeah.
In partnership and humility to listen to marginalized folks. And
like, I listen to friends who are a part of a homogenous church, like a white church, and they say, "Oh, we need to change our church so that we would become more diverse. Well, I appreciate that, but not necessarily, because again, I don't know. We get this small little snapshot of heaven, right? And we think, oh, we need to be like that, but maybe we need to apply more creativity and imagination to it, because one question I like to ask sometimes to my white friends is, what's your culture? What are the gifts and distinctives that you bring to the kingdom of God that reflects God's image uniquely? And most of the time, I don't know. Because as a majority, part of the majority culture, you don't have to think about that, right? It's something that you experience, but not something that you describe or you label or you find any words towards.
You think it's normal.
It's the
what is
norm, right? But you've never put words to. You just know what isn't normal,
Yeah, exactly.
right? That's differentiation by what it's not, but you don't know what it is.
Right.
And I feel like, well, that needs to be a part of our process as well. You know, that's a great, like, if there is a homogenous church, well, that's kind of similar to the Chinese church pretty homogenous. But as a homogenous church, but we're a part of the minority culture, we're forced to figure out what are these distinctives and what are they. We need to find those words so that we can re-enter into the majority world and be able to engage fully with our identity intact. That's where that whole, like, well, why don't you come join us piece could happen as well, because it provides some words. It provides vocabulary and reflection and questions that become a gift. You know, and not just, oh, we're a white homogenous church, let's just bring the Black Gospel Choir to come sing sometime. But hey, let's, as a small group, let's go to a Black church and experience worship, and then come back and let's talk about it. What was beautiful? What was different? And so, do we have anything to bring in that place? What's distinctive? You know, all of a sudden, like, it becomes a learning space. You know, and it's not mashing together a Black church and a white church together in the banner of diversity,
Right.
but that it's in the effort of growing in our worship, our understanding of God, our theology, our discipleship. What can we learn? What can we take? What can we offer? And I know of churches that do this. Like a friend in the DC area, he self-proclaims, we're a white church. Like, we tried to be a diverse, but we're a white church. I'm a white pastor, but we're going to hold this posture. We're going to enter into these spaces, and it's okay that on Sunday morning, they're an Anglican church. We do the ceremony. We do the liturgy, and it's very ceremonial and everything, and it's really white. It's really white. And fully embrace that, and know that as a community, we hold the value to go into spaces to learn, to grow, to be in, and sometimes, hey, we'll whip out a Spanish-speaking song, and man, it's uncomfortable. And then afterwards, why was it uncomfortable trying to sing this song? It wasn't worshipful. Why wasn't it worshipful? Like, we were focusing so much on the words and trying to get it right, and the rhythms are just, I'm not clapping right, and and to really lean into that as a learning space, because wow, God is so much bigger as a result. I think that is diversity, like holding that posture. It's not a Sunday morning look around, hey, we got people from every tribe, every tongue, everything. Oh, good for us, right? Pat ourselves on the back. but rather that it's something deeper that I believe really reflects the heart of God, in a posture of learning and growing and engaging and letting go of Godhead, humbling yourself,
Yeah.
being, I guess the technical word, being incarnational in the flesh, and crossing those boundaries and borders. So I think diversity can really look different. Some churches do it well, some churches don't, but I think churches that hold that value, I appreciate them.
Approaching relationships in humility, learning from people,
Yeah.
instead of enforcing or coming alongside and saying, listen to all this information we have. John Tyson actually had said something that I think is really applicable to this. He was talking about their worship gatherings.
Yeah.
And he wasn't necessarily even talking about diversity, but he talks about a value of their church being expectation without agenda. Expecting that approaching any situation in humility and love and for the sake of unity, expecting God to work, but not having an agenda of what that's going to look like.
Wow.
Sure, it might look like your church is full of people who come from different places, but it might not. And that's totally okay. There's more than enough value in just experiencing and learning from people who are different from you. And that reflects the image of God as much as a church that is full of people who look different than each other.
Absolutely. I will mention, like, oh gosh, so many thoughts, so much good conversation, man. This has been fleshing out really differently in our family, as a family, figuring this out for our kids. I don't know if we're right or wrong, good or bad, but we have a longing and a desire for them, one, not to be just around a homogenous group in context, but two, also not to be the only non-white face, and especially in the context of faith. Knowing that their faith journey requires that their mom and dad aren't the only people that they talk about God with, that they're talking about God with other people, but that those people wouldn't just be Asian or wouldn't just be white. And that's been hard for us as a family, trying to figure that out, especially in a small context. And so it's something that we don't have answers for, but it's a longing and a desire for our kids, that they would have peers and partners as well as mentors that aren't their mom and dad, so that faith would be real. I mean, there's such a desperation, just to borrow some lyrics from one of my favorite artists, that God would be more real than the air that they breathe, There's such a desperation for them to know the same God that I do, but I know that I need others and those voices so that would happen, that my little boy, my little girl, they would discover the person of Jesus and the forgiveness of sins and the freedom and the abundance and life on that. But that the way that they discover it would come from a diversity of voices, not just white, not just Asian. That relational piece is the thing that we really we're trying to figure out.
Yeah, it's a long for it.
So there's, again, no answers, because that's the hard thing about smaller spaces. You have longings for your kids, for them, but it may not be reality. So some of
Yeah.
it is on us. Like, we need to trust that God knows what He's doing, and that that there's grace enough even for us in all the mistakes that we make as parents. I want to mention one last thing in terms of that diversity piece. I remember talking to my wife about we had a chance to visit a church and got to know a family, and they are from Texas, very ultra conservative, and so their politics are right leaning. Their perspective, their approach towards Scripture is really conservative, very more literal. And I remember talking to my wife, like, I'm going to have a lot of trouble, like, hanging out with them and connecting with them and everything. But no matter how different their theology and their interpretation of Scripture, no matter how conservative, we still knew that their faith is genuine. They love Jesus. And two, when it came to crossing cultural boundaries, there was just this open-handedness, like just interest and full of grace. And so we knew we had political differences. We knew we even had theological differences, expression of worship differences, but they were willing to come and learn. And we had a great time. I think that's the kind of space we need for diversity to happen, and we were being discipled to hold all of these other things that we thought were really important, kind of, they love God, they love Jesus, they are following with all their heart and soul. It's not the way that we would express, but their posture towards us, it allowed us to connect and to find community and fellowship. And they're still really different, but they're friends. We call them friends, good friends, even though we have a lot of differences in it, and realizing that's diversity right there as well. Like, yeah.
It's amazing what humility can and does do.
Yeah.
Josh, thank you so much.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I have like 4 episodes worth of stuff, which is awesome. It's so awesome. I might just put everything out. But thank you. Thank you so much for your wisdom and
thanks for
your
your
love
questions,
and
man. Oh,
let's keep learning together. It's going to be messy.
Yes. And fun.
And really fun and really fulfilling. That's the thing
Yeah.
that I think is kind of the best outcome of this, is that we get to see the image of God, a greater reflection of Him when we humble ourselves.
Yeah.
Parish Podcast is a production of Vineworks Film Company. The executive producer is Nathan Hoag. This episode was produced, edited, and hosted by Canaan Hurst. Graphic design and set design by Erica Creasel. Find us on social media at Parish Podcast. Remember to subscribe and rate this podcast wherever you listen. This video podcast has been made possible by the generous support of the Sacred Grace, an incubator and accelerator that's cultivating leaders to take spiritual and social responsibility for their neighbors and neighborhoods. For more information, visit thesacredgrace.com.